Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Andrew Crosby, Managing Director at International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. And I'd like to welcome you to our panel, The New Landscape of Inclusion for Digital Trade. So ICTSD, for those of you who do not know, International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development, was established about 20 years ago. We're an independent organization dedicated to advancing sustainable development in the context of international trade and investment policy. So the focus today is on inclusion. So what does it mean to design for inclusion in the digital economy? Why is it important? What could be achieved? Which businesses and which actors? So I think we all have a natural assumption that we think we know what inclusion means. We know it when we see it, but maybe we don't know exactly what it is. So part of our goal here is to dig into the idea of inclusion around the digital economy and understand what it might mean from different perspectives. So we thought about two dimensions, really, in terms of the perspectives, but there's probably thousands of dimensions. We've asked two of our panelists to speak from a kind of a stakeholder or a segmental perspective, and we've asked two to speak from country perspectives and try and reflect some of those experiences. But from their own perspective. So what I'm hoping to get is not official versions of positions, but actually to dig into this idea and explore what it means. I have Kati Suominen, and I think you have bios, so I'm not going to go into long introductions, but Kati Suominen, Martina, Francesca Ferracane, Marcela Paiva-Velis, and Don McDougall. And I apologize at the outset for you've probably gotten different versions of the agenda on the web and here. My apologies. We had a little bit of confusion about who could participate, and I hope that I have some African colleagues in the audience who may be able to participate as well, as I was hoping to get somebody from Africa onto our panel. That's the wrong presentation. Let's see, what can we do about that? No? Can anybody help me? Yeah? There we go. Oh, no, now you're going to see my whole presentation. That's not fair. Okay, you just pretend you didn't see any of what flashed by in front of you. So this is a lovely picture. We had a hard time finding pictures, but I really like this one. So that picture, though, it belongs to someone. And I think that when you think about the world that we're in and part of this world that we're exploring, so if we think back to our experience in Nairobi at the ICTSD Trade and Development Symposium, we had a panel there of African business people who were talking about taking their creations into the market space and benefiting from them. And it's a huge challenge. So this is around not only intellectual property, but also around marketing, all the services that are related, financial services and so on, that go together to create an enabling environment. So this picture belongs to a company named Technobrain. So you wouldn't have known it unless I put Technobrain there, but you see there's a nice color coordination. And Technobrain's kind of a fascinating place. I discovered it as we visited the Kenyan Chamber of Commerce, and up above the Chamber of Commerce is a little office down below, and the rest of the building is Technobrain, which started out as a little community technology training center in Tanzania with really a training orientation, and turned into a multi-million-dollar vendor of back office services all over Africa. It's quite an inspiring story. They co-sponsored with us. But just to give you a flavor, and I think we'll hear more stories today about the types and the ways that people are using technology to not only make money, but to be inclusive in different ways. So why does the concept of inclusion matter now to us? So particularly, I think that we're being challenged right now, as you all know, by understanding how trade policies and trade-related policies can benefit our populations. and there's a lot of skepticism about that. It's a little bit ironic in my view, because it comes just at this time when we have this immense potential. So digital has a potential to include large swaths of our populations, swaths of the population that had never been involved in trade before. All you have to do is go look at eBay's data, but eBay's making its data available. That's not the only experience out there. But it's extremely interesting. And then countries can participate in new ways too. So if you think about, about the digitally enabled value chains and exchanges between companies, this is another angle. But a lot of this is dependent on this enabling environment, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It's different from country to country, so it really depends on where you are. And another reason why digital and inclusion are important to us right now is that we have a new set of sustainable development goals. And I'll look into that just a little bit, but digital relates like it does in other areas, but it relates to a number of sustainable development goals. We can think about how digital and trade relations could be put together in a way to advance some of our sustainable development goals. So there's a confluence here between both opportunity, if you will, economic opportunity mandate, and of course you all know that there's a growing level of interest here at WTO in the subject. So this is mostly what I'd recommend you get from this is just that this is a mapping of some of the SDGs with some of the digital components that might be involved and some of the trade agreements that are related. So you've got health, learning, mobility, building, and of course overlying that is poverty reduction, gender concerns, all these things that are relevant to the SDGs. We don't have all those relationships worked out. My colleagues in our development work are trying to narrow in a more micro focus on those, but this is an area of great potential learning for us if we understand how these things relate. That is a point of departure. So I was talking just about enabling environment, and so here we're playing around with a concept that I would really invite your critique and input. We need that. So the proposition here is that your interest, yours and your country's interest around provisions in digital provisions or e-commerce provisions, whatever you want to call them, or if you're at a different stage of development, maybe you call it just having a functional telecommunications system or banking system, right? So this is a way to help us think about, well, if your enabling environment and your enabling environment is well developed, you have a much greater potential to take advantage of things we think of as digital, without defining those exactly. And the further apart that enabling environment is, first you have different concerns, and second you have a gap to fill in a way before you can take advantage of all those neat things that we live with here in Europe and the United States and places like that. So I won't go into this. You can read it for yourself. I'm happy to share it. I would love to have you critique it. It will be really useful for us. I've gotten some good critique from some of you in the room. So it's just a tool to help us sort of dial in to understand what the different interests are. And then, so this is just, I like the graphic, honestly, but it all depends on where you are. It all depends on where you're situated to view this opportunity. And so one of the big challenges, we spent Monday talking about trade facilitation and services and digital and e-commerce. And we have radically different views about what needs to be done. They're not necessarily incompatible, but in a place like WTO, you have to account for those in different ways if you want to make progress. So it depends on a number of things, like infrastructure, without which digital could not exist, telecom, financial, lowering barriers to participation so that small businesses can participate. So the ones who are most sensitive to any barriers are the smallest actors. And right regulation that works together, that enables not only domestic market, but also international interoperability. That's a big issue coming up. So let me stop there. And I'd like to turn it over to our speakers. As I say, I've asked them to present on their just as they like. So the floor is yours, Kati. Thank you. Yeah, and I've got the clicker. Sorry, you need to go one more to the right there.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here. Well, I'll echo probably some of the comments I made yesterday in the plenary. A lot of people have asked, well, what is inclusive trade to you, and what does it mean? To me, inclusive trade means trade for all and by all people. It's really a world trading system where anybody can sell to anybody, anywhere, anytime. It is a world where garage sales can be global by virtue of, oftentimes, by virtue of e-commerce. And this will be even more so the case now that 3 billion new people are coming online by virtue of getting smartphones over the next 5 years. So we have a line of sight to this world where everybody can participate in trade one way or the other. However, there are, of course, several challenges as well, and we'll talk about this in this panel. We've seen study after study showing that companies that sell online, that participate in e-commerce, are much likelier to engage in trade, much likelier to export, much likelier to source from a broader market, typically the global marketplace, and they are also likelier to be more productive, even more productive than companies that simply have a web page but don't sell online. So I saw one World Bank study that showed that Vietnamese SMEs that sell on e-commerce platforms are 75% faster productivity growth than Vietnamese SMEs that have web pages but don't sell online. It really shows the power of trade in the lives of these companies, and it's a great booster for e-commerce is a great booster for this inclusive trade and trade by SMEs. And I thought I would show you a little bit, just kind of adding to the pile of studies that have come out lately. I did a study for the Inter-American Development Bank just very recently on different kinds of companies in Latin America and Caribbean, and I'll share some results from that. This has yet to come out, this study, but I'll show you some preliminary findings. So first, we looked at companies, to what extent Latin American companies, and these are typically companies of, say, 3 or 4 million in revenue, that are somewhat more likely to sell online than the broader market, but quite representative of what's going on in the region with SMEs. And we saw that companies in all revenue brackets are quite likely to participate in trade, in having cross-border online sales or cross-border online purchases, i.e. participate in e-commerce. So say 50% of companies with less than $1 million in revenue are selling cross-border online. And as the companies get larger, the likelihood of them selling online or purchasing online tends to increase. So this very much corroborates the other studies out there that show that companies that use e-commerce are likelier to participate in trade. Now, how relevant is this commerce for these companies, this cross-border commerce? Cross-border online sales of all sales for these companies are almost 40%. So again, it's a significant share of their revenue that comes from cross-border trade. Cross-border purchases are also very relevant as companies source inputs at a lower cost from other world markets. So 50% of cross-border online purchases are 50% of all the purchases that these companies make. And then we asked in this study, well, what are your challenges for expanding your cross-border sales? And answers were quite interesting. Companies said that challenges that they see as very significant include the familiar market access barriers, poor logistics, uncertain legal liability rules, some customs compliance issues, as well as problems with online payments. So this, again, is quite in line with what we have seen in other work, and shows that there is work to do in these areas and to further inclusive trade. And very interestingly, when we asked, well, what would happen if these barriers were removed? If you had better market access, you had better logistics, you had functionable online payments, and the revenue growth would be extremely significant for these companies. So on average, companies cited revenue growth of about 65% if these barriers were removed. So there's much work to do. There's a lot of productivity and trade waiting to be unlocked through savvy policies in Latin America as well as in the rest of the world. So some of the ideas that I would put forward here for us to consider, particularly as we're here in the WTO and want to think of kind of what kinds of rules can enable this kind of inclusive trade. We've seen, well, trade facilitation. We have the TFA. It's a great instrument. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily touch adequately this kind of new trade. We've seen that low-value item shipments across borders have absolutely proliferated in the past 5 to 10 years around the world. There's much more kind of parcel shipped from country to country than ever before. At the same time, governments have done very little to facilitate this trade at the lower rungs, if you will. The U.S. did raise the de minimis level from $200 to $800. It's a fantastic policy. I think a lot of countries should follow now in the footsteps and raise their de minimis levels in order to facilitate this trade in low-value items, oftentimes shipped by small businesses, perhaps from somebody's garage. Now, the challenge, of course, is a political economy challenge, that it is, for many governments, liberalization, and without getting anything for it. And there could be a solution to this debate that has been going on for 10 years, 20 years, and that solution could be a plurilateral on de minimis. So rather than posing this as an import agenda, you have to raise your de minimis and there's going to be more trade, you will get less revenue, you will get more imports, you will now, by virtue of a plurilateral agreement, get more SME exports for yourself, because you're dealing with other countries who are also raising their de minimis levels. So if we have an agreement where everybody ratchets up gradually to, say, $1,000 de minimis level, and everybody reaches that threshold in some number of years, and perhaps gains capacity building for SMEs to export at the same time, this could be some kind of a package to explore here at the WTO. I also think the trusted trader programs that we have had around the world in the past number of years, by number of countries are using the trusted trader programs to fast-track trade of those trusted traders that comply with trade regulations and are safe from customs security perspective. We haven't had anything like that for the smaller end of the market or smaller packages and so forth. So perhaps we could consider a trusted e-trader program where we look at the shipments of smaller companies, or if not smaller companies, then at least of lower value items, and determine that certain of these players are trustable, are trustworthy international trade, and we could have some kind of a simplified regime for those smaller companies or companies that have low value items to ship across borders. The second area where we tend to see a lot of challenges, and this study also shows the same, is online payments. Yes, we have a lot of online payments platforms around the world. We count these not in dozens, but in hundreds. We have absolute explosion of this. I believe in Brazil we had several of these platforms, and Brazil actually figured out how to enable buyers and sellers using different online platforms to transact. Right? So they instituted interoperability among the platforms. Now, we don't have this at the international level. Sometimes when you're trying to sell something from a developing country and buy it from an advanced economy or another developing country, your online platforms don't interoperate. And there are financial regulations that are behind this, that are obstructing this. And I think it would be a great way for the great effort by the WTO to bring together the financial regulators, trade policymakers, and other stakeholders that have a stake in the online payments systems, and figure out a way in which we can, guarantee that the financial regulators are responding to their prudential concerns, yet at the same time we can interoperate across borders on these platforms. Absolutely critical for small businesses, and many of us who have had any relationships to buyers or sellers in Africa have oftentimes come across this issue. And the final area, perhaps, that we could tackle at the WTO is digital regulations. In this study that we did at the IDB, we found in case studies that companies are oftentimes hampered domestically just because the governments make doing business difficult, or because the digital kind of regulatory framework is a little bit here and there or not developed enough. And now countries are developing their digital regulations, are revising what's in the books, are developing e-commerce regulations, and perhaps at the WTO, our role could be then to ensure that these are compatible. All these different countries and their regulatory schemes are compatible with one another, so that we don't end up in 5 years later, we're not sitting here and saying, oh, we have a very fragmented and balkanized system where the internet doesn't interoperate around the world, that we have territorialized pieces of the internet in every country, but we have not gotten this right. So we could get ahead of the curve, and this is where the WTO can play a very constructive role, both educating countries as well as then ensuring this harmonization, if you will, or mutual compatibility around the world. So leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Kati. I take note of the incredible potential that some of the traders see. And certainly Latin American traders are not the only ones to see the perceived potential if you remove the regulations is fascinating. So it partly explains why there's so much energy around this. So let me pass the floor to Martina, please.
So, thank you. Before starting, I want to tell you that we had some problems with the video, so please wear your little thing to listen. There's going to be a video at the beginning, and then you can take it off. So I'm a policy analyst in a think tank in Brussels, ECIPE, but I'm also a maker. So I'm going to talk now from the maker's perspective. And what most of you, I guess, have not heard the term maker. It means that instead of being a passive user of what I can find in the shops, I like to make my own things. And this thing was hard to do before, but now there are some maker spaces which allow you to make that. And these maker spaces are spreading around the world, and there are thousands of them around. So I'm going to talk about this phenomenon. So I'm going to talk about Fab Labs, which are a particular type of makerspace, and a bit about how they were created and what you can find there. And then how Fab Labs can promote inclusive trade. Then shortly about Industry 4.1, which is a word that I've invented, is a concept, a kind of evolution of Industry 4.0 that I think can happen through the makers movement. And finally, a few words on policy challenges. So about Fab Labs. Fab Labs stands for Fabrication Laboratory. And the first Fab Lab was created at MIT in 2001 by this professor, who is called Neil Gershenfeld. And what he did was to create a laboratory where he put the right skills, materials, technology, and support for allowing people to make their own things. So, and this was thanks to many technology that was developing in the early 2000s, which allowed basically to have a factory in a small laboratory. And I'm going to show you this video briefly and then tell you more about the Fab Labs.
But I had a problem. Once I had all these machines, I was spending too much time teaching students to use them. So I started teaching a class modestly called How to Make Almost Anything. And that wasn't meant to be provocative. It was just for a few research students. But the first day of class looked like this. Hundreds of people came in begging. All my life I've been waiting for this class. I'll do anything to do it. Then they'd ask, can you teach it at MIT? It seems too useful. And then the next surprising thing was they weren't there to do research. They were there because they wanted to make stuff. They had no conventional technical background. At the end of a semester, they integrated their skills. I'll show an old video. Kelly was a sculptor, and this is what she did with her semester project.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and this is my screen body. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you really have to scream, but you can't because you're at work, or you're in a classroom, or you're watching your children, or you're in any number of situations where it's just not permitted? Well, Screen Body is a portable space for screaming. When a user screams into Screen Body, their scream is silenced. But it is also recorded for later release, where, when, and how the user chooses.
So Einstein would like this. This student made a web browser for parrots, lets parrots surf the net and talk to other parrots. This student's made an alarm clock you wrestle to prove you're awake. This is one that defends your personal space. This isn't technology for communication, it's technology to prevent it. This is a device that lets you see your music. This is a student who made a machine that makes machines, and he made it by making Lego bricks that do the computing, just year after year. And I finally realized the students were showing the killer app of personal fabrication is products for a market of one person. You don't need this for what you can get in Walmart. You need this for what makes you unique. Ken Olsen famously said, nobody needs a computer in the home, but you don't use it for inventory and payroll. DEC is now twice bankrupt. You don't need personal fabrication in the home to buy what you can buy because you can buy it. You need it for what makes you unique, just like personalization.
Starting from this start, the most important point of the video is that it really talks about the killer app of personal fabrication is the market of one, and that's the great thing that of this kind of tools, because they allow you to customize the product to each of the people you want to reach, and there are basically no economies of scale in that sense. So I'm going to show you also the business applications, which are great. So. Since then, this was 2001, and since then, Fab Labs have been spreading around. There are thousands of Fab Labs today. Only in Brussels, where I live, there are 7 or 8 Fab Labs. I'm the founder of one of them in Sicily, and there are plenty, so you can find them everywhere. It's much bigger than we think. And kind of things that you can make in Fab Labs are, for example, this picture is a kidney that is printed with a 3D printer. This is something that is a bit too much for Fab Labs. There are some Fab Labs which are doing biohacking, so they're playing with bacteria in the Fab Lab and try to get people closer to science through digital fabrication. But there are also cases in which they also attempt to do things like this, which is a bit extreme example. But there are a lot of Fab Labs doing fashion, and this is a great application for 3D printing and digital fabrication. This is a picture from Fab Lab Barcelona. You can make electronics, and it's very easy and quick to do within Fab Labs. You can make drones, which are much cheaper than the ones you could buy in a shop. And there is also projects in which you can make entire houses in Fab Labs. And there's a project which is called the Fab House, which is made by the Institute of Advanced Architecture in Barcelona. So the kind of things you can make there are really incredible. It's a quite vast range of application. So how do you make this? There are some machines that you can find in each of the Fab Labs, and which are also great because you can also transport and continue working on your project in each of the Fab Labs which you are. So you can find in each Fab Lab 3D printers, and I guess most of you have heard about 3D printing. How it works is that you have a 3D model on a computer, you can download it, you can design it, you can scan an object and replicate it on the internet. And then there is a software which basically creates layers in which this product can be divided, and then the material is deposited layer after layer until you have the final product. And it's very different from traditional manufacturing, which normally is a subtractive technique. So you eliminate material. So there is also a lot of waste. And for metal, for example, there is 95% of waste of metal when you create metal parts. And with 3D printing, you basically eliminate the waste because you just use the material you need for creating the object. And so the advantages of 3D printing compared with other techniques is that you have no economies of scale, so you can easily change the file and customize it and make very little differences to the product and just print it again with the same cost of the product before. And this allows to have also iteration and do, for example, prototyping and change quickly and cheaply the product. And also there is you can create things which are very complex, which would be impossible, very hard to manufacture otherwise. For example, this picture that is in the background is something that can be done with this kind of manufacturing techniques, but not with traditional manufacturing. Another machine that you have in all Fab Labs is a laser cutting. So this is very easy. You just have a laser which cuts wood or plastic or metal. It really depends on what you want to cut, and in a way which is very precise, like this kind of things. And can be very detailed, up to 1 millimeter. So you can create objects like these ones that you can see there, which are made, both of them, in a Fab Lab. Other thing is milling machine. There are two types of milling machine. One is this one, which is very big, the one you see on top left part. And basically what you can do with milling machine is to cut an object in a 3D way. So you can cut it not only in 2D, but also giving the height. And you can make furniture with this machine very easily, and a lot of Fab Labs are making their own furniture and selling furniture also online. You can make houses, as is the case with Fab Lab Barcelona, and you can make a lot of other things. And the other milling machine, which is smaller, allows you to make circuits and electronics, and other kind of engraving on metal. So these are 4 machines which are in all Fab Labs, but also there are electronics, there are people that help you to learn how to use Arduino or similar things. And then, of course, you have the traditional do-it-yourself, so hammer and this kind of things. So it's very fun places. So now, coming to inclusive trade, I think Fab Labs can be very important in 2 areas. One is skilling of people to allow young people and also people that need to be reskilled to have the 21st century set of skills. And also it can allow to lower barriers to engage in business. And I'm going to go through these points quickly. So for what concerns education, the great thing of Fab Lab is that incentivize people to learn because they have a final outcome. So children, if you put these things in the hands of children, you can see that they think about what they want to do, and they have the tools to make this happen. So they are really incentivized because they have a final thing that they can touch and see. And so they don't only learn the skills of digital fabrication, coding, and these kind of things, but they also learn problem solving, critical thinking, systemic thinking, how to solve local problems, which are the set of skills which I think are going to be critical for the workers in the future and already starting from today. The Fab Lab I've created is for primary and secondary schools. Is specifically aimed at children and teenagers. But you can have different kinds. Most of them also apply to business, or others as for the community. It really depends. And one project that a teenager did in the Fab Lab Western Sicily, which is the Fab Lab I founded, is this project. I'm going to quickly show you a couple of pictures. Basically, he's passionate about music, and he had no clue of electronics. And he said, I would like to open a guitar and create a guitar with one string that can play electronic music. And so what he's doing now is that learning how to use sensors and code, and he's almost there. I cannot show you the final picture, but he's doing already a prototype and is working quite well. And this thing is something that could also go to market one day. So you never know. you don't, like, there is no limit to the kind of potential of this kind of product. And also going to university, Fab Labs can have another dimension, which is also to connect students with companies. And for example, in the University of Barcelona, the connection between students and companies is very strong, and especially when it comes to architecture. And this is a project of a student that has created a huge 3D printer for manufacturing. So it's creating houses for infrastructure. So it's creating houses with the 3D printer. So a third application is a reskilling of people that maybe lost their job or are about to. And Fab Labs also contribute to that by giving courses to anyone who is willing to take them. And this is an example of a course that I was managing when I was volunteering in a Fab Lab, and what we did was to create machines for biological experiments like microscopes, incubator, and similar things in a Fab Lab. So these machines normally cost thousands of dollars, and we made them very cheaply and accessible to everybody. So the people that were learning how to make the machines were learning digital fabrication, but they were also learning science together with it. So this, again, just to show the potential. Going into business, I think there are three particular dimensions towards which Fab Labs can help to promote and engage people in doing business. One is the fact that Fab Labs are based on open source. So anything which is done in Fab Labs is then shared with others, and they can replicate it everywhere in any other Fab Lab. And doesn't mean that open source doesn't mean free, or doesn't mean necessarily that you can have immediate access to it. It means just that if you want, you can ask and have access to it. So also by paying is not necessarily free. And for what concerns Fab Labs, you can have not only open software, but also open hardware. So you really receive information how to make another machine or another product. And this is a bit the motto of Fab Labs: dream it, make it, and share it. And then another thing is fast prototyping. As I was saying before, there are no economies of scale, and it's very easy to replicate the prototype. So when someone has an idea, rather than using normal way of creating a prototype, so going through molding and asking someone to create it for you and spend a lot of money for it and wait for weeks, you can go to our Fab Labs. You can prototype and have different prototypes all in one day. You can easily and quickly decide which product is good for you, and you can also test it in the market very quickly before you go for traditional manufacturing for mass market. So it really lowers the barrier of innovation in that sense. And this is an example. There's a student in Brussels, he's 16, and he had the problem that when going from one class to the other, his Coke was open and it was spilling over. So he just created a top to close the bottle, and then after a few weeks, he already went to market with it. So it's a classical example of how you solve local needs through Fab Labs. And finally, Industry 4.1. I think that today, with this kind of techniques, we are opening the possibility to engage in new ways of doing business and to engage consumers in the manufacturing process. There are a lot of platforms already today which allows consumers to go online, put their own preferences, put their own dimension. For example, in terms of for glasses, they can put their own pictures of their face, or they can scan their foot for in case of shoes, and they can really interact online with a company to receive a personalized and customized good, which is also done on demand. So on one hand, the product is more value because it's customized. On the other hand, there is also saving because there is no stocks. You just print the thing that you need to create. And an example is Nike, that is now printing shoes with 3D printing, and there is a platform where you can just very easily scan your foot, upload the pictures of your foot. You can scan your foot with the app, with your phone. You upload the pictures, and then you can receive a shoe that is customized to your own foot. And and it can go also very low in terms of like this kind of things, which is a table that I made myself. I just bought the file online for very little, and then I just made it my own table in a Fab Lab because I wanted to have a map on it. So I asked someone to help me to just have a map cut on a table. And so I don't know how this will cost, but for me it was like 20 euros, and I have my table, which is personalized. Then I have a couple of slides on policy challenges. I'm going to go through them very quickly because I guess we're going to have time to discuss them after. But there are a lot of issues which arise from this kind of concept. And Fab Labs are really, is not a small thing. It's really growing a lot. We were talking before with Andrew. So I think we're going to come to a point where we have to deal with this kind of issues. One is, of course, IPR. In Fab Labs, we are scanning objects and we are replicating them. And there is no clear framework of what we can or we cannot do. It would be much easier if we could just know what we are allowed to do, what we are not allowed to do, and also for what concerns open source, that's the same. There is no clear framework on open source. It's been created by the community, so we have the commons, we know the work, but there is no, it's not legally binding, so there is nothing very clear on it. Of course, ownership of data, that's an issue in general for Internet of Things, and tariffs and taxation. In the moment in which you buy something which is a digital product, and then you receive, for example, just the file that you have to produce in a Fab Lab, how do you pay taxes on it? How do you pay tariffs on that? That's the same issue of software and the whole discussion we have, and which is not solved yet. Legal liability and safety standards. Regarding this, there is like double issues. On one hand, there are a lot of safety standards which basically make it impossible in certain places to create Fab Labs because, for example, the use of laser is very dangerous for kids. Actually, it's not, but in some places this makes it really impossible to create them. On the other hand, on other things like air quality coming out from 3D printed materials, there is nothing. And I think this can be actually dangerous for health, so we have to tackle also these kind of issues. And legal liability in case you sell these things and they break, how does it work? It's not very clear. And legal liability also applies a lot in general to the Internet of Things. For example, if a fridge orders for you something and what happens, so these kind of issues are still open for discussion. And finally, certification. We are doing in Fab Labs a lot of machines. For example, we're doing 3D printers with 3D printers, and they cannot be certified. They cannot receive a mark, CE mark. And this is something that would be interesting to look more in detail. Long term, this is very, just to give a quick food for thought, disruption that might arise. What I always say is that disruption does not mean destruction, it's just change. And there are a lot of things that might result in change thanks to Fab Labs and digital fabrication. And this, it would be interesting to discuss them more in detail. Reshoring, because of course in the moment in which you can print the product on demand next to the customer, the whole global value chain changes. You don't sell and trade final goods, but you trade raw materials that then are used to create the final good. Loss of employment, I'm not sure there. I think for sure there's going to be disruption. On the other hand, and distraction, but on the other hand, these Fab Labs are creating a lot of opportunities for people in their local areas. And finally, when we talk about wealth and the way in which we measure wealth today, we consider waste to be part of our GDP. And with Fab Labs, you can lower the price of things, you can lower waste, and this might create, might mean less output, but more wealth for citizens. And it's something that in general is happening with technology, so it's something I think it's worth discussing further. That's everything. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Martina. So that's the ground floor. That's inclusion. And it is connected to the enabling environment. The Maker Summit report that I was talking to you about says the maker community economy in the U.S. is $8.4 billion. That's 2015. So it's a huge group. Marcela.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ICTSD for inviting me and forcing me to come out of WIPO. That's been really demanding my whole time recently. So I'm very happy to be here and having this opportunity of further reflecting on these issues that I believe are very important for the future. And this is not an easy question that they put to me, and I've been thinking for a while while I prepared this presentation for you. How can IP and innovation lead to more effective digital inclusion? Well, the truth is that IP and innovation is not like a magic wand that can come and, say that things can be done just by an act of magic. And I just wanted to briefly start by illustrating this with this interesting image that shows us the brain after sitting quietly and the brain after a 20-minute walk. This is my own personal seconds of advocacy for both meditating and sports. But at the same time, I think it's a way to illustrate the fact that the mind needs the body to be active. And somehow, as I think that we clearly saw in Martina's presentation, infrastructure and material conditions are critical if we really want to deal with this issue of IP and innovation. Without them, it's not possible. This is the first fact that I wanted to state, at least from my personal perspective. Now, it's also true that, well, the picture doesn't look very well in the bigger screen, but when these honorable authorities were signing the Marrakesh deal in 1994, less than 1% of the global population was connected to the internet. I think it was around 25 million people at that time. So it's true from that very basic fact that internet was not at all in the minds of negotiators, even though some provisions could come into TRIPS agreement, but very general. This is not what was in mind at that time. Now, even though the number has been increasing as we see, we still have places where there's not still access to internet. Currently, I think it's 40% of the population. And I just wanted to share this nice picture of Caleta Tortel, which is a very nice town in the south of Chile without streets. So if you don't like cars, this would be one of your favorite places. You can see there those pathways, those are the streets. So it doesn't have car streets. So I visited this place in 2009, and to my surprise, to contact out the world and my family in Santiago, I had to queue for the only flat line in town that could be of common use, of public use. And to me, that was really surprising. So now that I was preparing this presentation, I said, well, I will search what happened with Caleta Tortel that, to my surprise, at that time didn't have access to internet. And now I know that in 2012, internet arrived to Caleta Tortel. I mean, it's not that quite far in time. So this, I think, it's important to have these facts in mind, that we still have an important gap to fill in terms of access. But it's not only that, because when we get to see the numbers of access, right? And we see, I found these interesting numbers about accessibility. It's a very mixed pool of developing countries. And if we try to look, for example, to the 15 first countries in the Global Innovation Index, there's no match, necessarily. Not necessarily having access to internet will imply automatically being an innovative country. And I thought, well, this is an interesting finding. I would think that I would like to have more time to think about it. But initially, what we can also see about access to internet is ICT has shared with us these numbers of connectivity, connection to internet. And what we see is that mobile cellular telephone subscriptions are the ones that are in the increase in the last years. This is the way people are really accessing internet nowadays, which is super good. I mean, I think it keeps us communicating, it allows it to consume. But what about IP and innovation? When we look at the fixed broadband subscriptions, we see that developing countries are lagging behind. And what you see there, the red line in subscriptions, the red line is developed countries, and developing is the blue line, LDC is the red line on the bottom. And at least of what I could see, and I really appreciate the presentations of the two ladies that came before me. Martina was, I think I could even see like screens, images. We need also this fixed broadband, and we need technology not only in terms of cell phone connectivity. So when we look at these numbers, we really need to look a little bit behind them. What are we looking at? How this is enabling an IP and innovative environment or not? And then there's this other reality about the internet infrastructure. That is, well, this is just an image and a lot of words that it's basically, I put here to illustrate the fact that internet is based on copies. So it communicates information from one page to another through various copies. And when we see that intellectual property, what it does is somehow try to control copies, obviously this is going to be challenging in the internet infrastructure. Then intellectual property per se, or normally, it's a territorial regulation. Again, internet, it's global. And these two elements, I think, and if not more, make it very challenging to implement intellectual property provisions to the digital world. And I think that this aspect of the architecture of the internet, always, we need to have it in mind. We would like to foster the technology and the possibilities of the technology and not necessarily put barriers on those. Now, I think that these previous points that I raised are more like the context, but in conclusion of this initial part of the presentation, access is critical. We need hardware, how the internet service is working, how the individual is accessing the place to where it can connect and in which way. And I believe trade has a lot to say in this area. It's not my area of knowledge, but this house and the negotiations that are held here can help in this aspect. But then is the use. I believe that this is the aspect where IP and innovation comes to be critical. How are we using these tools? Are we using them to communicate, to interact, to consume, or we are going beyond, a little bit beyond? We are creating, we are innovating. So after the access that we believe is enabling to these issues is reached, the use, at least from my personal perspective, would be determined by at least these four issues or four criteria. The first one is education. And again, I think Martina's presentation was very clear about this, with this very interesting video of these fab labs and all what is going on in universities. Education is critical, and even at school level. This is not my area, so I'm not going to talk about this in particular, but I think this is the first element to have in mind. Then the regulation. What's the framework that we are putting instead to make this happen or not? Which are the incentives that we are providing to allow this to grow, and the public policies? And finally, the awareness aspect. What are we promoting or not to make this happen? In terms of regulation, I just extracted a few paragraphs of the TRIPS preamble that I believe are important for this discussion. And I highlighted some phrases because I think that it's important to always have in mind that intellectual property right, or we need to try to allow for a framework of protection that does not themselves become barrier to legitimate trade. And I think that this is very important, that it's part of the TRIPS preamble, that this is a possibility, that we need to have this in mind when we approach the regulation. It's also important that developmental and technological objectives are part of the public policy objectives. We also need to have this in mind. And I really like this one, that it specifically referred to least developed countries, that it should be respected to them the maximum flexibility in the domestic implementation of laws. But even though it refers to least developed countries, I believe that behind this statement, there is a recognition that flexibility is important in terms of domestic implementation. Allowing for this space, it's going to be important for developing and also for developed countries. Probably not at the maximum level as we're recognizing for least developed countries, but flexibility is something that we should see as a value when we talk about intellectual property regulation. And finally, I also wanted to highlight the fact that multilateral context can strengthen commitments and through this reduce the tensions. And I think that one of the barriers that was detected not in the very high segment of Kathy's presentation talked a little bit about this aspect of IP being somehow, the lack of clarity could be a barrier. So going to the specifics, what I believe it would be important to have in mind, first of all, is the clarity on rules. Martina also talked about this in the first bullet of her challenge in terms of policies. Clear rules, this is very important, hopefully at a multilateral level, and if not, at least at a national level, so that people that are relating with your country know what's going on. Protection of IP, it's very important. We know that it's in the basis of the promotion of creativity and innovation. But it's also important to know what it is in the public domain as well. What can people use? The fact that there are different types of licenses. We're talking about a technology that is enabling this exchange of information. And the fact that this is not clear can also hinder the possibilities of create more innovation. And this, I think this is a very important aspect that we are still, how can I say, in depth with our citizens, because we all in the different countries we have different times of protection of copyright material. So not necessarily is that clear what is in the public domain, what is not. Not every country has provisions on voluntary relinquishment. That is, that an author can, by his own will, decide that they will put something in the public domain. Not everyone allows this. So I think these kind of questions, we also need to think about this. Exceptions and limitations is in the same line. Fair use nowadays, and I will talk a little bit about this in the next slide, it's critical, and we know that it's not a common standard. So in the overall, a balanced intellectual property system, I believe it's crucial, but it's essential, and also flexible. Because I was looking at all this new biohacking, 3D printing. New technologies are coming all the time. If our systems are too stiff, they will be outdated, and in the end, these areas will be unregulated. The excessive detail is not even conducive to, wise public policy of sort of, having things in a clear structure. So we need to be really creative to try to build flexible rules that can apply to different new technologies. If they're too detailed, if they're too focused in specific technologies, they will be outdated all the time. And I've been to Congress to try to pass laws and been also in negotiations of multilateral agreements, and it's not that easy. So I think we really would need to think about this. And well, there it's in the bottom, the internet neutrality aspect that I really like, and I think that even though it's not an IP issue, it's very important to always have in mind that the fact that we need to promote that as a general principle. Like there shouldn't be this differentiation of where the content is originated. ESP should have a general service for everyone, and this is basic to enable this environment. Also, I think competition law, it's going to be very important in this new world, not only in the services aspect, IP, I think it's also important, but, well, there's a lot to talk about. These are the specific issues we could talk for hours. I wouldn't like to get into much detail about this, but I was really surprised about this biohacking, because this includes a new dimension to the regulation. I can't just see that now this is outdated. I would need to include some patents or other kind of regulation as well. So, well, we can talk more if there is an interest, but I would like to pass it to other slides. And well, I think that this is just an example of how important fair use is nowadays as a concept, and I have to say as a concept because we don't have it in Chile, but we've tried to push for that, and we have a provision that somehow reflects what fair use is, that basically is an exception that's based on principles that can be applied to different situations. So that's the kind of flexibility I'm talking about. This is a space of flexibility where the judge can, or the user can assess, self-assess their use, and then present to court, if that's the case, that they are under this space of permission of law to use protected material without asking for permission or payment. This is just a case to illustrate this, and I would really recommend, if you're interested in this, to read a paper written by Jonathan Band that actually is here, that was published by the University of Maryland Journal, that's called Google and Fair Use. This is not the first case, it's not the last, but I think it's very important because this allowed Google to present you the cached versions of the web pages, old web pages. I've used this myself, so I really think it's a very important tool to promote access to information, and I'm very happy that actually this was considered a fair use in the end. I also talked about incentives, and I will just give a few examples. So this is a policy that started in Chile a few years ago, the Startup Chile. I have to say at the beginning, because the basic idea is that we offer an amount of money and a space for innovators of other countries to come to Chile. And at the beginning, I felt that, well, I don't know if I'm very comfortable with this. Why don't we use this money for local innovators? And I wasn't sure personally if this was a good idea. But actually, I think that this goes very well along scholarships and others kind of initiatives that we're bringing Chileans abroad. So this allows for innovators to come to our country. And as you can see, even though 76% of the members are foreigners, 24 correspond to Chilean talent. So I think this has been a very important project that can also promote the exchange of ideas and the movement of knowledge. I also have this example to share with you that it's a site that I like a lot. This is Chilean memory. So a lot of this documentation that is in public domain, again, I think this goes in the line of promoting access to public domain. This initiative is led by the National Library of Chile. It's accessible today online. And if you can see in that slide, there down in the bottom, it says some rights reserved. So it's not all rights reserved. They use some flexible licenses in the case of copyright material that's still protected, but they also digitalize and publish content that it's in the public domain. So I think this is also, the idea is to put in place knowledge for people to recreate and try to build the knowledge of the future. This is also an interesting project that started in 2012, and what it does basically is that it promotes a platform. It's established a platform to create open source applications for public sector, so they can share the applications among them, and in that way not duplicate efforts and share whatever one ministry have created with another ministry. I searched how many applications are uploaded. I saw around 20. It's not much, but I still think that this is kind of the things that we could do that probably don't demand a lot of efforts or regulations, and that could make the difference in the end of allowing a more enabling environment for IP and innovation. And the last point I wanted to touch, and I think that Martina talked about this slightly a bit, it's about awareness. I just took this paragraph from WIPO, what awareness is, and actually it's very important. Building respect for IP means helping create an environment in which IP can fulfill its role to stimulate innovation and creation. And sometimes when I see awareness campaigns, a lot has to do with what we cannot do and what it is forbidden, and you can't copy, and you can do this, you can't do that. And I think that it's also important to start changing a little bit that, and also do the effort as governments, and I'm doing here also like a self-criticism somehow, but also showing what people can do. I still remember when we reformed the Copyright Act, and we had a lot of provisions for libraries, and we were very happy. Okay, we reached this important goal of balancing our IP Act. We have exceptions for libraries. This is very good. But then when I started talking with some of the librarians, they were struggling because they didn't know how to implement this that we have agreed. A lot of these provisions are being finalized in late hours in Congress after negotiations with some constructive ambiguity, and obviously they weren't really clear of how to implement them. What's reasonable portion, or these kind of concepts. And I think it's also a role of the government to help a little bit in telling people what they can do as well. And not only at the level of the community, but also in courts. We also need to teach judges about balance. We need to teach them about protection. We need to teach them about exceptions. We need to do the whole work, and the same with congressmen and government officials that are not necessarily IP experts. So I think this is the last point I wanted to share with you. And in conclusion, just to sum up my presentation, I think that before IP and innovation, access to internet and information technologies is critical. In order to promote IP and innovation, education is essential. And IP and innovation could lead to a more effective digital inclusion if we take into consideration the particular internet architecture, as I showed with that slide, the computers. If we establish balanced and flexible intellectual property systems, if we put in place incentives and proper public policies, and finally, if we raise awareness of what is prohibited, but most important, of what is permitted. So that's it. Thank you. That's a nice picture of Santiago that I took myself.
Thank you, Marcela. So you covered a lot of ground. One point that I think for me resonates is just having a handset and a mobile broadband is great as a consumer, but not necessarily as a producer. So the fixed broadband is actually incredibly important to sustain productive systems, given even that the mobile handsets are doing a lot of things, but that's an essential element. A lot of other good points. Don, over to you, please.
Thanks. So there's no copyright on that picture, Marcela? Okay. Okay, I'd just like to give a little of the Canadian perspective. I know we're supposed to speak for ourselves, not so much the country, so I'll try to do both, I guess. It's hard to separate the two. This is Canada. You might recognize it. It's a population map. It's a little old now, but I think it tells the story. I put it up for two reasons. It shows we're a huge country, but we're also very dispersed in terms of our population. And the first reason I wanted to show that is that it shows the importance of connecting Canadians to each other, but also the geographic challenge we face in doing that. And it also shows the importance to Canada of open borders and international trade. You can see from the map that all of our population centers are basically closer to the U.S. border than they are to each other. So as you've probably heard many times by now, and certainly even earlier in this panel, digital technology can contribute to inclusive growth. We've made competing in a digital world a pillar of our inclusive innovation agenda, and that's a real thing. I didn't just make it up. So you've seen the map. Inclusiveness to us means connecting our remote and rural communities. to the urban economies and international trade. Most Canadians are already online, and nearly all have access to broadband coverage. Inclusiveness also means strengthening the middle class by creating good quality jobs. And empowering SMEs can also make an important contribution to employment. And we've heard lots already about how digital technology is empowering SMEs in that regard. But we do face some challenges also, particularly in trying to ensure that everyone benefits. Canadian SMEs have low adoption rates of digital technology compared to larger firms. Rural and remote areas are not as well connected to high-speed internet as our urban centers. And innovative cross-border service providers are like Uber here and Airbnb. They do create displacement in traditional service industries. These ICTs are creating good new jobs, but these jobs require greater skills to use the technology than the technologies they're displacing. So this has actually led to wage dispersion and can lead to greater inequality. So despite the immense opportunity, there's also a risk that digital trade can create winners and losers. And an inclusive trade agenda should seek to strike a balance between maximizing the benefits of digital trade, but also mitigate the potential negative consequences. And to do that, firstly, we need to invest. Infrastructure is obviously critical, and Canada is investing to connect, or better connect, I guess, its remote and rural communities. There's also a role for the private sector. Here I highlight a wonderful project by Cisco, where they, as part of their corporate social responsibility program, have been connecting schools in our remote northern communities to schools in what they call the South. And it's had a remarkable impact. Attendance in some of these schools is up. It's allowed schools to broaden their curriculum. It's allowed them to have cultural exchanges between students, and it's allowed students in need to have access to counseling and mental health professionals. And we also need to invest in skills. There's lots of opportunity out there, but we're actually having trouble filling all those jobs. And Martina's presentation was inspirational in that regard. I don't know about you, but watching that presentation, I asked myself what I'm doing with my life. I mean, gee. We also need an enabling environment. And this is a long list. I'm getting ahead of my own notes here. Sorry, I'm ahead of my notes. Yeah, so this is a long list, but the essence of it is that we need transparent rules. We need the businesses and consumers, they need to have faith that their online transactions are secure and that their data and privacy will be protected. And exporters, particularly small, medium-sized enterprises, need to be able to get their products across borders efficiently. Now I'm on track. So remember our map from earlier. Canada is a trading nation, and we simply can't conceive of our digital policy in a vacuum. Opening markets for e-commerce to the benefit of the digital economy includes traditional market access, like services and investment commitments, etc. But it also requires addressing new barriers to cross-border communication and emerging issues such as market access dependent on the requirement to transfer confidential business information. I guess I should talk about the WTO since we're here. What can we do here? Many of the issues that I addressed in the last two slides are already addressed at the WTO in one way or another. There's a lot of tools already in place to start with. All of the obligations of the WTO agreements are technologically neutral and apply equally to goods and services produced, marketed, sold, consumed online. So there's already tremendous coverage, and then there's other tools. There's plurilateral instruments such as the ITA that can make a difference. But beyond what we've done here at the WTO, Canada's FTA practice has certainly evolved to take on newer obligations and address the breadth of the issues that I mentioned previously. But not all members have that experience. It's been a long policy development process. We've been negotiating e-commerce chapters since basically all of our post-1990s FTAs. So, I think the first contribution that the WTO can make is to start to close that knowledge gap between members that do have that experience and those that are still struggling to think about how their trade policy can adapt in this environment. And so the first step for us, I think we need to use the e-commerce work program more effectively. Canada, along with the EU and a number of other members, put in a paper very recently, which seeks to stimulate some discussion in that regard. A number of other similar papers came in, which is very encouraging from our perspective. Our paper is publicly available if you haven't seen it. I'll make a little sales pitch for myself since I'm here. It's job/GC/97/Rev3, if anybody's interested in looking it up. I think it's pretty good. But we can also leverage the transparency function of the WTO to improve members' knowledge about measures in the digital space and how they impact trade. And here in particular, Canada will be coming forward soon with a proposal to look at this in the context of the TPRM review. We'd like to see trade policy reviews look more closely at digital measures. And we think that the WTO's monitoring reports could also consider measures either facilitating or restricting digital policy. We think this would help us get a better understanding of the problem. I know there's there's an increasing knowledge base out there, and in Martina's other hat, she's done some very good work in enumerating that the body of measures in this regard. But I think WTO members would certainly benefit from that kind of discussion. Finally, I guess my concluding point is simply that I think it's obvious that for the WTO to remain central in trade policy development and relevant in the modern economy, we need to have an ongoing and robust dialogue about how digital policy and digital measures impact trade and how trade policy intersects with the digital economy. And I guess I'll finish there. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Good job of connecting the domestic and international again. I'm glad you touched on skills as well, because that adaptation, like we've heard throughout the panel, is important. So it's good to hear those efforts. Thank you. So we've got about 5 minutes or so left. And what I'd like to do is take a couple of questions from the floor if we can. I'm sorry we're short on time, but at least two of my panelists, and maybe like the rest of you, need to run out very precisely at 5. So the floor is open for a couple of questions, but I probably won't be able to address all of them, assuming there are questions or comments, please. So the floor is open. No? Okay.
Stunned
Good.
and decided.
You just wowed them. Okay. You all wowed me, for sure. So let me do this. Let me just come back to each of you and give you 1 minute. What did you hear from the other people on the panel that you thought was inspiring? I'll start with you, Kati.
Well, I would just echo what everybody else was saying about the importance of IP. That's clearly is a huge issue with what was shown here. And then the role of the WTO simply in educating countries and kind of benchmarking where we are, whether it's part of the trade policy reviews or something else, to advance the knowledge of what the impact of these kinds of rules are and help countries navigate. There's, at least what I've experienced, a lot of uncertainty among countries about what these rules are and what they do, and it could be a very good function for the WTO to simply work on that. So,
Good. Thank you. Martina.
From my side, I think that it was very interesting to see that for each of us, access, so connectivity and skills are very crucial. And this was something that also came out in the last report of the World Bank, or the World Development Report. And so these analog complements of the economy. So I think there are two areas in which we should really focus and start working to make things better for the digital economy.
Thanks. Well, one point I didn't touch probably, and this comment that I'm going to give is just in my personal capacity. And, you know, as the WTO, we're here, the work program on electronic commerce, and if we look at it, in particular, the aspect related to TRIPS Council, my personal perspective, and based on what I showed to you, is I believe that it would need to be somehow adjusted. I don't know if this can be done that easily, but currently the three issues that are presented as the basis of the discussion look a little bit narrow, considering all this reality that I just presented. So that would be my personal impression. If we really want to have a broad debate, we will need to include some other issues as well, in particular the balance aspect of acceptance and limitations and other issues. Thank you.
Thanks. I guess the first point is that it's obvious that inclusion is really important to all of us, and it is also something, you know, I think it's clear from all of these presentations that there's a lot of space for using digital technology to promote inclusion. But I also found it quite daunting, just listening to Marcela in particular go through all of the IP issues, and I mean, there's obviously still a lot of questions out there, and I don't think any of us have all the answers. So I think this ongoing dialogue will be important.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So on my part, you have feedback forms. We really appreciate it if you fill them out. I got everything I wanted out of this panel because I feel like our speakers brought us into a realm that I hadn't thought of before in the same way. So please give them a hand. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank as well our staff from ICTSD who was working here, Jimena Sotelo, Valentina Tarantini, Sylvia, and thanks to the interpreters. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Looking forward to any feedback you have, either personal or through the feedback forums. Thank you.